Okay, so good morning, everyone. So we can start early. So before we begin, let us put ourselves in the holy presence of God, and I'd like to invite JR to lead us in prayer. JR.
Good morning, everyone. Let us put ourselves in the most holy presence of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Father in heaven, God of love, all I have and am is yours. Grant that I may become a living sign of your compassion in this world. Grant me the faith to live my life, always in the awareness of your loving presence. Grant me zeal to serve without thought of reward those to whom you send me. Grant me charity to bear the burdens of my brothers and sisters. Teach me to seek your Son's face in the last, the lost, and the least. In whatever I undertake, may I seek above all things to procure your glory as far as I able and as you will require of me. Strengthen me by your Spirit to follow Jesus by living the commitment I make this day. Amen. St. John Baptist de La Salle, pray for
Pray
us.
for us
Live Jesus in our hearts
forever.
forever. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much for that prayer, JR. So good morning once again, everyone. So this is the third sustainability lecture series for this year. So to start us off, I'd like to call on Professor Raymond Tan to give us the opening remarks.
Thanks very much. Let me just share my screen. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to the president of De La Salle University, Brother Bernie Oka, to De La Salle University Chancellor Emeritus and one of the founding members of the team organizing this lecture series, Dr. Carmelita Kibenko, colleagues from De La Salle University and the Global Lasallian Network, and of course, friends and colleagues from academia from all over the world. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 15th installment of the Sustainability Lecture Series, which was originally launched in January of 2021. This lecture series was founded in the midst of the pandemic as a way for us to share our thoughts and our expertise to deal with various sustainability issues, which are central to the mission vision of De La Salle University. More importantly, of course, DLSU is part of the International Association of La Salle Universities, a global network of higher education institutions based in 5 different continents with interests in various aspects of sustainability. And this was originally intended to consolidate the network and share our work on sustainability matters. But over the past year or so, we've seen plenty of interest from partners in academia, but not necessarily in the Lasallian network. And we certainly welcome regular participants who join us on a monthly basis, and new ones as well. So the series of lectures is inspired by 2 important documents. In 2015, for the Catholic world, the document published as the Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, which wrote of or spoke of the need for us to protect the one planet on which we live as a human race. And in the same year, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were also released, and both of these documents have influenced our university's policies and the way we think, definitely towards the need for us to apply our expertise and our knowledge towards a global mission of ensuring the safety of future generations through intelligent use of research findings. As a result, we've been able to sustain this lecture series with contributions from the best and brightest of our university and from resource persons from outside of DLSU. And we have held the lectures by and large on the last Wednesday of each month. Pardon the rather early time of day. This is intended to have better coverage of people in different time zones. On occasion, we've had to shift the schedule to a different time as well. The lectures are streamed via YouTube, but we have, rather via Zoom, but we do have a dedicated YouTube channel. For those people who are unable to view the lectures live, the recordings are permanently on record. And we deal with diverse topics related to sustainable development, ranging from clean water to energy to education, any topic that is relevant towards holistic development and equitable improvement in the quality of lives of people, not just in the Philippines, but anywhere on this planet. We have explored alternative formats, and this is what we're actually doing this morning. Rather than a single long lecture, we have a panel discussion of three young scholars who are among the best and brightest next generation talent of our university. And on occasion, alternative languages. We do have a large audience in Latin America. And last month and next month, the lectures will be delivered partly in Spanish. We're taking in resource persons from the entire global network. And of course, this lecture series, I have to say, is jointly hosted with IALU by our Center for Engineering and Sustainable Development Research. Two colleagues from engineering, of course, Professor Dr. Alvin Colaba has been with us from the start, and the current dean of our College of Engineering, Professor Dr. Kathleen Aviso, and a team of research assistants behind the scenes will be working with us. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our host. Thanks very much. I hope you find the panel discussion very engaging and interesting.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Tan. So before I move on, I'd just like to introduce my co-host for this morning, Ms. Ria Sumagang. So she will be helping with the moderation and with the hosting for this event. Take it away, Ria.
Thank you, Dr. K. To introduce our speakers, I would like to call on the Director of the Center for Engineering and Sustainable Development Research, Professor Alvin Colaba.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening from all over the world. Chancellor Emeritus Carmelita Kibenko, Brother Bernie Oka, the President of De La Salle University. And of course, we have here Brother Josh Heiter and other brothers of the Salesian schools around the world. Colleagues at the LSU and other colleagues in the academe. We welcome you again to this third lecture series for the year that focuses on an important tool or approach in sustainable development studies. The Center for Engineering and Sustainable Development Research was established back in 2003. We're almost 20 years now, which has actually produced several scientific studies, close to 10,000 now, published in highly reputable journals, and actually studied by amongst the world's top scientists who belong to the center. It is actually a center that focuses mainly on sustainability issues. And today we have actually come up with three of our most talented young scientists who are going to present, something which is novel in sustainable development, the use of machine learning. The first speaker is a full professor at the Department of Biology at De La Salle University, where he earned his bachelor's in biochemistry cum laude and MS chemistry. And of course, he holds a PhD chemical sciences from Hokkaido University as a Japanese government scholar. His research focuses on environmental chemistry, bio-nanotechnology, and biochemical applications of machine learning. An associate editor for the Scopus Index journal, Network Modeling Analysis in Health Informatics and Bioinformatics, published by Springer Nature, is also one of the lead authors of the Global Environment Outlook 6 for Youth in the Asia Pacific, published by the United Nations Environment Program. For his environmental contributions, he was one of the recipients of the 2019 Asian Youth Eco Champion Award given by the Asian Environment Ministers during the 15th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on the Environment held in Siem Reap in Cambodia. He will be joined also by another young scientist, a recent graduate of a PhD in mechanical engineering, also at De La Salle University. He completed his BSMS in mechanical engineering with distinction and cum laude. He has contributed several works on machine learning for sustainable development, which includes the Demetel FCM framework, of which the framework integrates multi-criteria decision analysis and machine learning. Our speaker has published in high-impact journals such as Journal of Cleaner Production, Clean Technologies, and Environmental Policy. His research works included mathematical models, multi-criteria decision analysis, life cycle assessment, and machine learning. Our second speaker is Dr. Ivan Ge, whose interest on themes of machine learning for sustainable development includes circular economy and sustainability transitions. Our third speaker is another young scientist, a budding, young international publisher, currently an associate professor of mechanical engineering and our current assistant dean for research and advanced studies at the Gokongwei College of Engineering at De La Salle University of Philippines. In 2018, he was selected as one of the lead authors of the United Nations Global Environment Outlook Youth Report for Asia Pacific. In 2019, he became a national consultant of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization for the automotive industry. He was also selected as one of the 12 ASEAN Science and Technology Fellows out of the 3,000 plus applicants in 2019, where he worked with the Department of Science and Technology to analyze energy efficiency and consumption in micro, small, and medium enterprises. In 2021, he also became a lead consultant for the World Bank in the assessment of a potential net zero roadmap for the Philippine transport sector. Our third speaker is Dr. Neil Stephen Lopez. So ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all our speakers, Dr. Hanairo, Dr. Ivan Ge, and Dr. Neil Lopez.
Thank you very much, Dr. Colaba. Today we have an exciting format because it will be a panel discussion. But first, we will hear from our three speakers. Just a reminder to the audience that we will be entertaining the questions after our third speaker. But please feel free to type in any of your questions in the chat box. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Hanairo. We will be hearing a pre-recorded presentation from Dr. Hanairo.
A pleasant day to everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present my work in this platform. I am pleased to share with you all my research on how machine learning can make chemical processes more environment friendly, especially for peptides. Successful discovery and development of bioactive products is expensive and time consuming. Using drugs as an example, recent estimates of the costs associated with drug development leading to commercialization to be in the range of hundreds of millions of US dollars. One of the main drivers for the huge time and financial investments for drug development is the high failure rates. Thus, if trial and error can be minimized, the cost of drug development may be lowered. One of the growing strategies in accelerating bioactives discovery and design is the utilization of machine learning models. ML has the potential to recognize complex patterns in data, which can identify potential leads much faster. The promise of machine learning in speeding up drug development seems to be bearing fruit, since on January 30, 2020, a compound intended to treat obsessive compulsive disorder and was developed through ML models entered clinical trials in Japan. The compound, known as DSP-1181, was developed by Sumitomo Dainippon Pharma and AI-driven drug discovery company Exscientia. DSP-1181 was discovered by using a proprietary drug discovery AI platform, which substantially reduced the time it takes to enter clinical trials from the average of 4.5 years to just approximately 12 months. Although not considered as drugs, antioxidants represent an important class of health and wellness products. This graph shows a growing trend for the market value of antioxidants in cosmetics alone. My presentation focuses on antioxidant peptides, which are promising bioactive components of food that can provide both health and nutritional benefits. Apart from being sources of amino acids that constitute an important part of the human diet, antioxidant peptides can also quench reactive oxygen species that are implicated in numerous diseases. However, antioxidant peptides require varying and innovative techniques for their efficient extraction and characterization. This can increase the cost of production, making it a barrier to the wider utilization of antioxidant peptides. A possible way to simultaneously decrease the cost of production and accelerate lead discovery is to focus on the search and development of short peptide sequences. Peptides are usually produced through solid-phase peptide synthesis, which is also used for the industrial production of bioactive peptides. This method involves anchoring a protected amino acid onto a solid support, which will then be elongated through a series of deprotection and coupling reactions. Once the desired sequence has been achieved, the elongated peptide chain will be cleaved from the solid matrix for purification and characterization. However, solid-phase peptide synthesis can have negative environmental consequences. This mode of peptide production requires greater molar equivalence of the reactants to drive the reaction, as well as its dependence on toxic solvents and reagents. Thus, solid-phase peptide synthesis presents an effective, yet environmentally impactful process of producing peptides. One approach in decreasing the environmental impact of chemical processes, such as in antioxidant peptide production, is focusing on shorter antioxidant peptides and minimizing the trial and error of the process through computational models. Leveraging machine learning can quickly identify promising leads to be developed, thereby reducing the compounds to be synthesized and tested, which can make the entire process more resource efficient and environmentally friendly. In this study, the formulation of a machine learning model that can predict the Trolox equivalent antioxidant capacity of tripeptides is presented. The ML model was trained and tested on 109 tripeptides curated from 2 different publications. The first step in predictive model building involves the identification of the peptide descriptor and algorithm pair that can accurately predict the antioxidant activity of peptides. It was found that the combination of support vector regression with a polynomial kernel and BLOSUM indices can accurately predict the antioxidant capacity or activity of the tripeptides. After identifying that support vector regression with a polynomial kernel and BLOSUM indices create the best pair for Trolox equivalent antioxidant capacity prediction, The resulting model was refined in order to improve predictive performance and parsimony. Thus, one Blossom index was systematically removed from the model, after which the predictive performance in the training and test sets were monitored. Through this, it was found that removing Blossom index 3, 4, and 10 had the greatest effect in improving the predictive performance of the model. Since the R-squared in the test set is greater than 0.6, model K can be considered as a valid regression model that exhibits good fit, which is in accordance with the criteria set by Alexander et al. In 2015. The identified important descriptors for the predictive model are consistent with reports from mechanistic studies that sought to determine factors governing peptide antioxidant activity, such as the importance of electronic properties, structure, flexibility, and the N-terminus of the peptide. External validation is an important component of model building, as it tests the optimized model on data that were not part of the training and test phases. Here, the following peptide sequences were taken from different published papers. As the table shows, the formulated ML model performs well, even in data that were not part of the training and testing, as evidenced by a 7% average error. The presented support vector regression model is a valuable addition to the growing ML and AI tools that are tailored for predicting antioxidant capacity of peptides. Some of the strengths of the presented model are the discovery of new descriptors that can predict peptide antioxidant activity, its real-world applicability since the variable being predicted is a standard measure of antioxidant activity, generalizability since the model was trained, tested, and validated on 121 sequences extracted from multiple publications, and robustness as exemplified by the performance of the model in external validation. Machine learning holds a lot of promise in making peptide chemistry more environment friendly. Shown here are my works on creating machine learning for various peptide applications, such as for material science, bioactive peptides, which I have just presented, and peptide structure. That concludes my brief presentation, and I thank you all for your attention. I will be happy to continue our engagement beyond this lecture, so please feel free to contact me via email or over at Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanairo. We will be entertaining questions after our third speaker. And now we will proceed with our second speaker, Dr. Gwen. We will also hear a pre-recorded presentation from our second speaker.
I'll be presenting here our research work on the use of rough set-based machine learning in extracting if-then rules for urban waste management. This research work is actually in collaboration with Dr. Neil Lopez, Dr. Anthony Chu, Dr. Aristotle Obando, and Dr. Raymond Tan. But before I start the presentation proper, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Aviso for inviting me to lecture in this webinar. The flow of this presentation would first focus on the key problems, the problem of sustainability in urban cities, the resource problem. And then I'll describe here what a brief overview or a brief literature review on the use of machine learning in resolving urban sustainability. This is then followed by the objective of our study, which will showcase what we would provide additional knowledge to this concept of machine learning and urban sustainability. This is then followed by the methodology of this study, which will encompass an overview of rough set theory, as well as the data sets that were utilized in extracting the if-then rules. And finally, I'll present the confusion matrices or the classification accuracy of the models and the if-then rules that we were able to extract. I'll then provide the conclusion of this work. Now, on the background of the study, globally we have unsustainable pattern. As reported here, there is an increasing trend in terms of domestic material consumption. And 50% of our global domestic material consumption is attributed from cities. This is projected to grow by double of today's rate by 2050, around 90 billion tons. This unsustainable pattern will pose a problem in the future, and it has been suggested or has been proposed that the key to sustainability among cities is to actually implement the circular economy. The concept of circular economy, to give everyone a brief idea as well, is the concept of transforming our economic system to a more circular one, where we could actually reutilize the waste of a product through pathways and enabling businesses. These businesses may be in the form of different types, such as in the case existing business models, such as in by Aren here, where they would actually lease furniture, thereby increasing its utilization. Additionally, the Library of Things would allow rent among home appliances. So this would actually extend the product life as well. Among cities, if we want to transition towards a more circular economy, we have to understand as well how resource flows in cities. But understanding resource flow is a challenging thing, as cities are very complex. We have to understand that resource flow is connected to the attributes of the cities. This is demonstrated by the concept of urban metabolism, where we could think cities as organisms that metabolizes materials. Therefore, being a complex system, understanding the inner workings of cities will be difficult. This has resulted to the idea on the use of machine learning, of finding patterns in data or city data and knowing or gaining insights on how we could drive our cities towards sustainability. And what I'm showing here is just a brief overview of what machine learning is, where we use data, input the data into the computer, of which the algorithm will find a pattern. And notably, this has been applied among sustainable development issues, as also demonstrated in the theme of today's webinar. In urban sustainability, I did actually a Scopus search on what are the current trends of machine learning and urban sustainability with these keywords here. There is an exponential growth since for the last 5 years. This can be attributed to the emergence of machine learning or the emergence of sustainable development goals. And it's a promising field, as machine learning can help us solve the complexities of cities. Preferred approaches among these research works are actually on the use of the more popular method, which is artificial neural network. Artificial neural network has been applied in city planning, such as in the work of Feng and Su, in green infrastructure by Koshnava et al., and in identifying gentrification by Reeds et al. The difficulty here is that we are reliant on considering black box model. Being artificial neural network, being black box model, it will be difficult to understand how the patterns were recognized, how the data was modeled. Of which this becomes an issue. I'd like to highlight here a literature by Doshivelet and Kim, where they argue that interpretability becomes a critical factor, a critical characteristic in machine learning when it meets these two criteria. If the problem itself has significant consequences, or if the problem has difficulty in real world validation, of which coincides with the city planning, as there can be significant consequences if there are poor city planning, and also it will be difficult to validate if we have a black box model and validate it with an actual system such as cities. Of course, there has been initiatives already done in realizing the interpretability of machine learning for urban sustainability, such as by Saldivar Sali, where they use decision trees in classifying cities, and in one of our works together with Dr. Tan and Dr. Ubando, where we created a network map towards urban circular economies. However, we find that this can still be a bit challenging, as you could see that this decision tree is cascading in its approach, while the network map might be a bit confusing. That's why in this study, we pushed for a more simpler way of representing it through simpler linguistic rules of if-then rules. So the idea here is that if we could dilute all of these characteristics, the urban metabolism, into simpler linguistic rules, it can be highly interpretable. So the problem again here is if we want to have more sustainable cities, the transition towards sustainable cities will be complex. It will require a machine learning approaches because of its complexities. And existing models will utilize black box models or models that are difficult to interpret. Therefore, this study aims to generate if-then rules, simpler if-then rules to generate an interpretable model, of which rough set theory based machine learning is utilized to generate these rules. The potential significance of this, of course, is to identify how the city attributes affect waste management and also provide an interpretable model among stakeholders of city planning. Now, onto the methodology. The rough set theory actually is based on the idea of having lower and upper approximation in terms of your sets. And this would allow a better discernibility between your patterns. I'm not going to go dive in the details, but the idea is simply once you have the data set, you're going to first discretize it, provide a more discrete values, and then from here on, RST will generate the decision rules, identifying the elementary sets, discernible attributes, identifying the redux, which are redux are basically sets that sufficiently describe the data set. And then from there, we're going to generate the decision rules. We'll then obtain the if-then rules, which will solve the objective of the study. We've actually utilized a software called Rosetta in extracting the if-then rules. In terms of dataset, we utilized datasets representing city attributes and the country of which they belong to. So we've used city attributes from the Arcadis report, which was released in 2018, describing three pillars on society, environment, and economy. And then we also have country attributes utilizing the data from the Global Innovation Index. We utilize the Global Innovation Index because it has a very broad way of describing countries, and it's very useful for us as it can capture a lot of these attributes. Overall, these two datasets will comprise around 100 cities, of which the scores are normalized from 0 to 1. We then discretize this by assigning scores with greater than 0.5 as H, meaning high performing, and scores that are less than 0.5 as L, meaning low performing. The datasets provide a total of 38 conditional attributes or 38 independent variables, 17 of which belongs to cities, 21 belongs to countries. And then we have assigned one specific attribute as the decision attribute, of which in this case is the waste management. We highlight the waste management as the decision attribute because it is one of the factors that becomes relevant when you're considering circular city economies. And then when we're training the model, we use a 70 to 30 ratio in terms of assigning data points to the training dataset and the testing dataset. Now let's move on to the results. From the results, we were able to obtain 3 redux. Redux here means a set of attributes that are sufficient to describe the dataset, meaning we could remove the other attributes already. We can just only focus on these attributes in describing the waste management. From here, we've utilized the redoc of R1, which captures the city level attributes of EDU, education, crime, employment, university technology research, knowledge impact, and online creativity. And of course, we have the waste management as the decision attribute. We were able to obtain classification accuracies of 88.57% for training and 90% for testing, meaning the model was able to attain a good generalization. It can capture or it can predict cities even outside its even unforeseeable data. And then this is the confusion matrix indicating how much data points were captured accordingly. This is the prediction and what is the actual. So 89% classification accuracy is the performance that we've obtained for the model. For the if-then rules, we were able to extract 19 if-then rules, of which you could see it here. From the redoc 1, this is education, crime, employment, university technology research, knowledge impact, online creativity, and waste management. What this means in terms of the color here is if this attribute is green, means it is of high performing. If it is red, it means low performing. A gray color here would mean that it is a do not care attribute, meaning it can be high or low performing. Such as in this case, in Rule 1-1, if all of these attributes are high performing, it would indicate that the waste management would also be high performing. While in this rule, Rule 1-12, if all the attributes are low performing, the waste management performance is also low performing. Okay. And this one will capture the city attributes, while this second box are the country attributes, and this is the decision attribute pertaining to waste management of the city. And interestingly, we've found significant rules that can describe waste management city performance. First one of which is Rule 1-1, where we could see that if we have high-performing conditional attributes in this attributes, education, crime, employment, and online creativity, we will get a waste management of high-performing, meaning this is of homogeneous attributes of high-performing. And notably, this one indicates how much cities were captured by that rule, of which it would capture 22 cities of our 100 city data set. Cities that would fall under this would be Calgary and Birmingham, where they have good performing waste management. Another rule that is of interest is Rule 1-3, where you could see that under city attributes, it's high performing, but it is low performing in terms of your country attributes. But it still attained a good waste management. This highlights that there is a potential that even under low performing country attributes, cities themselves can actually have good waste management system. They can be independent from the country attributes. This rule captures cities such as Seoul, where they actually have volume based fee system that is initiated by the local government, hinting the relevance of local governance in waste management. Another interesting rule here is Rule 1-6 and 1-7, where we see that they have similar city attributes. This being DNC means it can also be of low value. And their big difference is the country attributes. We see that Rule 1-6 would have high performing, Rule 1-7 would have low performing. And this would actually define their waste management system. When under a lower performing in terms of your country attributes, you would have low performance in waste management. This is also true for waste management. If high performing, you also have high performing for waste management system here. This would capture 10 cities for Rule 1-6, and Rule 1-7 captures 10 cities, which highlights a significant number of cities, being 10 of 100 of the dataset. Rule 1-6, Rule 1-7 actually captures cities such as Bangkok and Jakarta, where open landfill is prevalent, while Rule 1-6 will capture cities such as Miami, where there is actually an online presence of the government. This hints two things. First is that online e-governance might have influential effect to waste management system. Second, countrywide policies might actually impact cities. I mean, that might be a deciding factor under these attributes towards better waste management systems. And finally, we look at Rule 1-5 and 1-14, where they would have almost similar attributes, as you may see here. They will almost have the same, but the different conditional attribute is education, with Rule 1-14 would indicating a high performing education system. But under high education, we got a poor or low waste management, and under low education, we got high performing. So this is a bit counterintuitive on why this rule was captured. We could argue here because this rule would only capture one city. This is actually a fluke or an outlier. For everyone's information, Rule 1-5 will actually capture the city of Pittsburgh, where waste segregation is mandatory, while Rule 1-14 would capture the city of Chicago, where waste management is done through community engagement. Therefore, it might highlight the potential impact of mandatory waste segregation, but then again, it only captured one city. There has to be more case studies on this, whether mandatory waste segregation would have a positive impact on waste management. Now, on to the last part on the conclusion. What we did here is we generated linguistic rules from the city attributes from the datasets, and we were able to identify specific patterns towards waste management performance. As highlighted earlier, there are specific patterns where cities themselves can actually have a high performing waste management system, and also highlights the potential of e-governance towards waste management systems. Whether, of course, there has to be some extended analysis on this, whether the online presence of a government can actually impact local waste management system. And the findings here actually provide some interesting insights on how we could improve our waste management system and hopefully towards circular city economies. I thank everyone for listening of my presentation. If you have any queries or any comments of my presentation, you may always email me through this email address, ivan.gue@dlsu.edu.ph. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gue, for that very insightful presentation. We will now proceed with our third speaker, Dr. Lopez. Dr. Lopez, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So, again, I'm Neil Lopez from the Department of Mechanical Engineering in De La Salle University. And I'm happy to be invited to share our recent works on using machine learning to unveil patterns on sustainability data. So for students who are in this call now and also researchers who would like to get into this kind of work, let me lead you first to some free online data sources, some very good free online data sources which we actually use in our studies. So let me quickly. So first one, so you can visit the World Bank database where you can search a lot of very good data related to sustainability. So you can look at GDP economic data, you can look at energy data, you can have a look at even, for example, like what we used in this study, like the number of researchers, the number of PhD graduates, population by age range, etc. No? So this is a very good resource for researchers. And then for energy specific data, you can visit the International Energy Agency. No? So where you can look at data as far back as in some countries as far back as maybe 1950s, or 1960s. So you can look at very detailed energy balances from the International Energy Agency. So for example, I'm showing now here in my screen data for the Philippines. So you can look at production, imports, exports of energy, and some industry level, high level industry energy utilization data as well. Let me just move this. And then lastly, the United Nations also publishes a lot of databases. So like in one of our previous studies, we did a study on energy security. So we did we got data from the United Nations Comtrade database. So in this database, you can get import and export data of different countries for different years. For example, in the energy security study I just mentioned, so we studied where the Philippines imported its energy, it's an energy resources, its fuels, in the last 10 years, which countries it imported its energy resources. So you can get it from this database also for free. So let me go back to my presentation now. So again, these are the links where you can explore these data. So what do we know about climate change? So of course, the topic today is sustainability. So climate change is basically a change in global or regional climate patterns. So in particular, a change apparent from the mid to late 20th century onwards, and attributed largely to the increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. So some causes and effects of climate change. So of course, one of the established causes is rapid industrialization, energy use, agricultural practices, so which is also a source of non-fossil based carbon, so deforestation, consumer practices, livestock, transport, resource extraction. So almost everything we do nowadays has its own carbon footprint. So that's what makes climate change a very complicated problem. So of course, the effects include rising temperatures, rising sea levels, unpredictable weather patterns, etc. And in the end, this can result to people being displaced, increased poverty, loss of livelihood, hunger, etc. So in fact, is there a consensus among the researchers regarding the cause of climate change? So there was a study which surveyed and found out that 97% of climate scientists agree that human activities are causing recent global warming. So as you can see here on the screen, So the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere started to rise uncontrollably, starting 1950. And we see on the right side that our current mean temperature is already 1.02 degrees higher than pre-industrial conditions. And regarding the argument that this is part of the natural cycle of the Earth, so if we will be following that cycle, we should actually be cooling down right now. So we should not be warming up. So definitely climate, it's already established that the cause of climate change now is increased emissions in the atmosphere by human activities. So it seems like the answer is so simple, right? When we're talking about climate change, because we just need to stop emitting carbon, but it's not easy to do. It's a very complicated problem, because it will change everything we are doing right now. Most of the things that we are doing right now, it will change our lifestyle, our way of life. And we have to answer a lot of difficult questions. For example, which sector to prioritize in addressing emissions? Which type of policy to adopt? Do we remove fuel subsidies, etc.? Do we support renewable energy? What kind of policy should we adopt? And which technologies also to invest on, or which sector to invest on, and among others. And hopefully this is where studying data using machine learning can contribute to help us answer some of these questions. So using machine learning as a tool, we can get insights from tons of data available to us, researchers. And in a way, this also involves trial and error, like other researches, like other experiments. So because sometimes you will get something interesting, sometimes you will not really get anything which makes sense. So it also involves some trial and error for researchers. And in my opinion, the use of machine learning as a tool for studying sustainability is not really the end of any study in general, but really it's just the start. So what it can probably give us are leads to further discuss and investigate this problem. So at this point, I would like to discuss now a recent paper we published in Clean Technologies and Environmental Policy, which utilized rough set modeling to try to find patterns or understand the attributes of low and high emission countries. So what are the most common characteristics or attributes of countries which are low emitting and countries which are high emitting? So as discussed already by the previous speaker, so we have a good background already of what rough set theory is. So basically, rough set theory generates a rule set from the data. So what you see here on the right side of the screen is the output from the software using rough set theory. And then from this rule set, you need to make sense of it. So you need to interpret the data to understand the patterns. So one key advantage for me of using rough set theory in this exercise is that rough set theory can work even in the presence of gaps in the data. And as you would all agree, I'm sure, if you have been studying different countries before, there are a lot of gaps in the data. So especially if you would like to cover like all 190 plus countries in the world, it's impossible to get a perfect data set, especially in developing countries. So some of them only started to collect and publish data in the 2000s, so like in 2006. So yeah, so if you have gaps in your data, it's difficult to use other tools or methods. For example, regression-based approaches, it might be difficult to use them if you have gaps in the data. So for rough sets, it can deal with these gaps in the data. So I will not be discussing in detail the theory behind rough sets, but what I will be discussing in this slide is our approach with regards to how we process the data and how we interpreted the results. So first on the left, we have to do some data processing or conversion for our continuous data. Now we had to convert them into categorical data through a fuzzification process. And then we input this data into ROS2. The ROS2 is the software we use for rough set modeling. and then the software outputs the rule set, no, from the data. And then from there, we start to interpret the results. So after we get the rule set, no, so we separate them into low emission and high emission data sets. No? So for the decision attribute, no, so our decision attribute in this study is CO2 emissions per capita. No? So for low emission countries, no, so their CO2 emissions per capita should have a level of 1 only. No? So the level for emissions in this study was set from 1 to 9. No? So 9 is the highest and then 1 is the lowest. No? So for countries which have an emission attribute of 1, we will separate them. And for countries which have an emission attribute of 6, 7, 8, and 9, so we treat them as the high emission countries, and then we separate them. No? And then what we do on the rule set is for each attribute, no, we count how many times each attribute appears, no, on the selected rule set, and note the magnitude of each appearance as well. No? So afterwards, we compare this magnitude, no, factored in yung number of appearances with its average magnitude, no, in the raw data set. So for example, in a low emitting country, does it show, no, a high or low level? So for example, when we are talking about poverty incidence, for example, so what is the average poverty incidence, no, in the raw data set? And then in a low emission data set, what is the average magnitude, no, of this attribute? So we do that comparison. And then based on this comparison, no, for both the low and high emission countries, we judge what the predicted value of the attribute is, no, for the selected scenario. So again, so in a low emission scenario, what is the average level, no, of this attribute of this average level of this factor, no, or variable? Then in the high emission data set, what is the average magnitude, no, and occurrence, no, frequency of occurrence of this variable? And then afterwards, we validate our findings, no, with information from published literature and other supporting data. So to give you an idea of what data we considered in this study, so we got our data source is the World Bank, no, in 2019. So we consider population density, population at different age ranges, GDP per capita, no, so the value add of various industries, no, exports, imports, access to electricity, poverty, even doctoral education, no, the number of researchers, no, the number of patent applications, tourism, no, so number of tourists visiting the country each year, tax revenue, R&D expenditure, the number of scientific journal articles published by each country, and then the pump price, no, for diesel and gasoline. And then as I mentioned earlier, CO2 emissions per capita was our decision attribute, no, in this modeling. So now let's go to our findings. Now, what were our most significant findings from this machine learning exercise, no, on this data set? So the most significant attribute, no, of a low emission country based on the rough set modeling was having low exports. So low emission countries have low exports, specifically low agricultural exports. Now that was the most significant attribute we found, no, when we studied the data. So food exports, high technology exports, these are also included here, no, but the most significant one was having low agricultural exports. Of course, agriculture is also a source of non-fossil based carbon, right? So key issues which arise here, no, which are also from published literature already, are one, globalization and trade. No? So of course, there's a lot of benefits with globalization, no, which includes tech transfer and economic growth, no, for developing countries. However, increased globalization recently have also been a cause for concern, no, by scientists. Now, according to them, this has become a means, no, to leak emissions, no, from developed to developing countries. Now, so for example, developed countries have increasingly become CO2 consumers, while developing countries have become CO2 producers. No? So in fact, there was a study published in 2016 which found out, no, or which said, no, that emissions in developing countries are largely driven by increased exports recently. So that was the main attribute, no, for a low emission country. The second most common attribute of a low emission country from the data set was having high fuel pump prices. No? So I think it's straightforward to understand, no, why this is important or why this affects emissions. But for me, being the second most important or second most significant attribute for a low emission country is something new. No? So it's something worth investigating further. So of course, we know that there are countries, no, which have fuel subsidies, no, to their residents. And when I looked into the data, out of these 41 countries which provide fuel subsidies to their residents, 10 are among the 10%, no, in terms of the highest emissions per capita. No? So when you look further into literature, there is varying opinion, no, with regards to how fuel subsidies can affect emissions. So there are scientists which say this will not really affect emissions so much. There are scientists which say this can have a significant effect. No? So I think a key factor to consider here is that transportation is a complex issue, and transportation is central, no, when we're talking about fuel prices, because of course transportation is a basic need, no, of the population. So even if you increase, no, the fuel pump prices, if there are no better alternatives, no, for the public, it will also not be reflected as much, no, yung the change, no, you will be implementing. So you have to consider, no, that the transportation is central, no, to the issue of fuel pump prices with regards to mitigating emissions. And the third most significant finding for a low emission country was having low scientific research activity. So of course, this is not to discourage, no, research in developing countries, but perhaps what this highlights is that energy or sustainability might not be the most important research topic, no, we have now, because of course there are a lot of research being done also about health, no, and other issues like security. So what this tells us perhaps is that limited research manpower and resource in developing countries is an issue, no? And then there is a need for a proper research roadmap, because perhaps it's possible that we are pouring in a lot of funds in research, but we are not funneling them down to maybe the right areas, no? At least not good enough, no? Not good enough, not funneling them down properly, not funneling them down good enough, not to the correct research areas or research topics. So let's now move on to the common attributes of high emission countries. And no surprises, no, on this one. No? So one, high GDP per capita, high exports, no, of goods and services, and having a large working population. So because of course the working population is what is driving economic growth and consumption, no, in an economy. And the key issues which arise here are, one, population in developing countries is projected to triple, no, by 2050. So this is an area of concern. And another question, which is also largely discussed in literature, is the feasibility, you know, of decoupling between emissions and economic growth. So some key takeaways for me, no, from this exercise. One, so the characteristics of high emission countries are actually well studied already in literature. No? But what I realized while doing this study was that the characteristics of low emission countries actually are not yet studied as much. No? So with this exercise, we open up a lot of good points for discussion, no, on what the characteristics of low emission countries are. And an interesting finding for me also is that the attributes of low and high emitting countries are not simply opposites, no, but they are rather unique, no, suggesting that the countries also evolve when they become high emitting countries. So of course, when a country moves on from being a developing country, a rapidly industrializing country to a developed country, it changes its priorities, no? The demographics also change, no? The needs and wants of the people also change. The types of jobs available in industries present in the country also change, no? So countries evolve, no? So they do not simply increase their consumption, their production, no? As they grow. And because of some machine learning techniques' unsupervised nature, I believe it can give a fresh take, no, even on most heavily studied topics already. No? So this gives us a lot of opportunities, to publish in this topic. So there's definitely interest not only in the use of machine learning, but on the further development, no, of the approaches, no, using machine learning for sustainability studies. So I'll be ending my talk here. So I'll be happy to answer some questions later on, if any. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lopez, for that very enlightening presentation. Now we will proceed with the panel discussion. Allow me to put a spotlight on our speakers together with our Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, Dr. Raymond Tan. Okay. All right. So I'll start with the first question from the chat box. This is from Dale. Thanks for imparting the sharing on machine learning. I would like to ask what are the capabilities and limitations of using the rough set? Maybe anyone from the panel can answer that question.
So I'm not personally an expert, no, on rough set modeling itself, no, but from what I know so far with rough set, we have to that it cannot conveniently deal with continuous data sets. So that's why we had to do some fuzzification also on the data. So that's one limitation. And then the other one is, I'm not sure if maybe Ivan can talk more about this. I'm not sure if how well it can treat like ordinal data also, no? So yeah.
Yeah, I actually agree with Dr. Lopez. The limitation with RoughSet is you'll be reliant on their discretization. It can't handle continuous data. And the good thing naman, in terms of capabilities, it can actually handle ordinal. Specifically, if you're dealing with categorization, that's the strong point for it. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Now for the second question, how important is the amount of data in evaluating the efficiency and effectiveness of rough set machine learning in generating and interpreting rules? This is from Emerson. So it's also about the rough set technique. Maybe Dr. Gue can also answer.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say in terms of data, the good thing with RoughSet is that it will just find the patterns, no matter how many data it has. If it finds this pattern of discretization, it will work already. Like not unlike your neural network where you have a continuous number or continuous value, it can have different errors or different differences. While in RoughSet, just by capturing that pattern, it will be able to generate the rules. I would say the limitation, however, is in the validity. If you have too few of the data, you have that little confidence whether those patterns are actually true or not. It might be only in one case, or I mean, it's still up to your idea on how confident you are with the number of data points that will be captured. And hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gue. This next question is for Dr. Lopez. May I ask if the country's investment on fossil fuels is included in the data set?
No, we did not consider that in the study.
Okay. By the way, for the audience, if you want to address your question directly, you may raise your hand and unmute yourselves. For the next question, this is from Jay to Dr. Gue and Dr. Lopez. A very interesting lecture on ML, particularly using fuzzy rough set and ANN for sustainability research. In your study, how do you identify or select the decision attribute? Does it need to have a correlation of the attributes before inputting in the ROSE application?
Yeah, I think that would be it would be good, no, if you can do that beforehand also. But actually, you can, if you want, you can just go straight into inputting the data, no, and see what it gives you. But of course, what you need to do later on is to validate the results, no. Of course, the results have to make sense. You have to consult previous literature also about what they say on this phenomenon, no, about on this data. So in our case, the decision attribute was already clear from the start, no, in my case, because we wanted to understand the characteristics of a low and high emitting country. So in that case, perhaps the question was, should we use emissions itself, or should we use emissions per capita or emissions per GDP? So that's probably a more important question, no? So in that, when deciding on that, you have to consider different things, no? So you have to consider the differences in scale, no, of the countries, no? Of course, if you use emissions itself, no, of course, a bigger country would have a higher emission. So to try to eliminate that like effect, so you can divide it by the number of persons, no? So you can use emissions per capita. So yeah, so those are some of the considerations when we decided on the decision attribute.
So I'll answer naman. So thank you for that question, Jay. First off, in how we identify the decision attribute, it actually boils down to the research question, to what we intend to answer. So in our paper, it was on waste management because we aim to answer in terms of urban sustainability. And we find that waste management is a precursor towards circular city economies. That's why we selected it as our decision attribute. And now to your second question, does it need to have a correlation between the input and the output? You don't necessarily need the correlation because it would only reveal how one variable affects the output variable. In dealing with rough set, it will actually handle mostly in terms of how all of the attributes affect the output variable. So there can be some interactions between variables. The correlation can be a, let's say, pre-assessment of which significant variables there are. But then again, there can be patterns where even it doesn't have a good, high correlation, it can still be a significant attribute when partnering up with the other variables. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez and Dr. Gue. For the next question, it's from Professor Biswajit Sarkar. I see him in the audience. Professor Sarkar, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question directly?
Okay, thank you very much for asking that matter directly without writing this one. Thank you for the 3 big presentation, which exactly I wrote last several times that we need to concentrate on this thing, that the application of the artificial intelligence, the field of circular economy and the sustainability. So what is the main concern is that first point was there that how much data is enough for decide that the for the real life decisions, because it's not like that we are taking only for the research paper. It's about the real issues we are dealing with, and the data always are the real things we are dealing. So how much data is enough to decide for this one? This is the first point. The second point is that whenever we are taking the data, that some data we are considering for the training data, some for validation. So is there any specific we are using for that ones, like 70%, 30% or 80-20, something like that? And the third one is that whenever we are considering the attribute matter, that there are several points per attribute is formed. So is there any specific number, the limitation that maximum this number of attributes we should form, or after that we cannot do that because it's a combination of these attributes is coming from Boolean and this Boolean algebra and combination of the fuzzy things we can combine together. So there is my question. So these three questions I need to know.
Okay, maybe anyone from the panel can answer that question.
Okay, perhaps I can address the first question about the how much data is needed. So in my application of machine learning in chemistry, the challenge that we face is really the availability of data, and we work with very small data sets. So in my study, for example, the number of cases is just around 100 peptides. So compared to other fields, that's really a small data set. So to ensure the validity of findings, so in chemical machine learning, there is what we call the applicability domain, wherein we try to set the boundaries of the validity of the patterns found by machine learning. So there's no established way of determining the applicability domain. So it's just like you're telling that compounds that exhibit these attributes will be valid to be included in this machine learning model. So that's one way we address the issue of small data set. And then for the issue on data splitting, so I always encounter that question from reviewers. No? So what's the reason why you chose 70-30 or 60-40 for the split? And based on my review of literature, there isn't any rule of thumb when it comes to data splitting. Although I found that it's not wise to use a 90% to 10% because it will not lead to learning. So the model will just memorize it. So it means your model will be prone to overfitting. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hanairo. Anyone from the panel can address question 3?
I agree with GI that perhaps there's no established rules yet, no, on how to do these things. So for our study, we decided to include all countries. So we did not exclude, no, any country in the data set. So perhaps what will be more important is what you do during the validation stage. No? So whatever, like in any modeling study, whatever result which comes out of your modeling, no, you have to criticize it. No? So you have to check previous literature if it connects, no, with what previous findings were also. No? So I think it's an evolving area or field of study as of now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. For our next question, it's from Jeremy. May I ask Jeremy to unmute himself to address his question directly to the panel?
Hello, good morning. Can
Good
you hear me?
morning.
Okay.
Yes.
So again, thank you for organizing this event and to all the speakers. Actually, I would like to add one part to my question that I sent here. So I have a three-part question. So number one is first, am I correct to think that RST can be used to narrow down the most important factors to determine a specific value? And number two, regarding the magnification of these values, is it limited to low and high values only, or can we increase the magnification of the analysis similar to other fuzzy logic related studies? Like, can we increase it to very low, medium high, very high? And the third one is, how do we deal with the granularity of the factors? Because sometimes, for example, a specific factor can be actually broken down to smaller factors. Is Rafset theory very particular regarding the granularity, or can we use different factors with different granularity? And how do we deal with for factors that are actually correlated with each other? Do we have to be particular in determining which factors to use for this type of analysis? So that's all.
Okay, Dr. Ten, may we hear your answer to the questions?
Well, thanks very much for that question. Now, with respect to rough set-based machine learning, the choice of an actual machine learning technique depends on the application. And in the context of sustainable development, we've formed a small research group actually among ourselves, where the intent is to use machine learning to glean policy insights from available data sets from various organizations. This is very distinct from many machine learning applications that we're aware of, where very often there's an intent to have an automated or autonomous system. Say, for example, if you have aircraft diagnostics, which will tell engineers when maintenance or parts replacement is required, that can be fully automated. And you could use some of the more mainstream techniques like neural networks, support vector machines, which are not inherently interpretable by themselves, although there are add-on techniques based on the Shapley value, which can be used to augment them, but that requires a second algorithmic step. Now, if the intent is decision support, where what we want is perhaps use machine intelligence to find things in data that would normally overwhelm the typical human brain. Just to illustrate this point, if you were thinking of a medical doctor, 2 years ago, they would have been trying to figure out what are the symptoms that are the markers of COVID-19. You'd have fever, for example, dry cough, and all of that. And that really means that the intent is not to automate the process, but to guide or augment the brains of the people making the decision so that they're able to see things that they would not normally be able to see easily until they have years of training. I think Dr. Lopez touched on this point earlier. So then that addresses a lot of your questions, because mathematically, you can have as many categories as you want, down to the point where, to the extreme that every sample in your data set could be a category in its own right. That's the ridiculous extreme, so to speak. But of course, in machine learning, we're trying to get generalization. So we want a larger number of samples supporting a particular association or a rule. And therefore, because we're using it for decision support, we need to calibrate the granularity of the data, as you pointed out, so that it achieves your goal of fitting it inside the brain of the human user. And there are psychological studies, for example, that a very good number of categories for interpretability purposes and for insight purposes is just 3. If you have if-then rules that rely on 4, 5, or 6 categories per input variable, it actually overwhelms the decision maker. And therefore, 2 may be too coarse-grained, 4 is pushing the limit psychologically, and I think ternary or trivalent rule-based systems are actually found to be a good compromise in many real-life applications. All right, so I think that's all I have for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.
If I can add a few comments on that also. So I agree with Dr. Tano. So mathematically, nothing is prohibiting you from increasing the magnification of the levels, the resolution of first study. But if you try to do this, what you might be, the limiting factor would be the fact that you are trying to use actual data, real world data. And if you, like in our study, if you try to plot your data, you will be surprised that the data are extremes. No? So there are not a lot of representatives on the middle values. No? So it's either just low or high. So in our study, we categorize emissions from 1 to 9, right? 1 is the lowest, 9 is the highest. So like majority of the countries are towards the rating of 1. Then if you try to look at 3, 4, 5, you won't really have a lot of representatives. And if you try to include that in your analysis, you would only have like maybe 1 representative for this level. And as I think Ivan also touched on that earlier, right? So how can you trust your data if you only have 1 representative on that category? So that might be more of a limiting factor now, because when we are doing this machine learning type of study, we want to use actual real world data. So that's what limits us also.
Thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you,
Tan
sir.
and Dr. Lopez. For our next question, it's from Dr. Anthony Chu. Some attributes were picked from their priorities cited in the major RL. Since ML can be powerful and can randomly run different attributes, would it be interesting to test two sets of attributes, one selected by prominent RL and one randomized? The result may bring to a new hypothesis that RL done through survey or expert opinion can be misleading. Any comment on that insight?
Yeah, I agree with that, Dr. Chu. So that's actually what I was excited about, no, when I tried to do this machine learning study with the World Bank data set. No? So because as you saw in my slide earlier, we even considered poverty gap, no? And then we also considered population of from different age ranges, international tourism, like the number of tourists visiting, because we don't know, no, what the data would show, no? So maybe it would appear, no, that tourism is really a very important factor. So even the number of patent applications, no? So in a way, we tried to address this, no, in our study. But yeah, so as the model showed, so those things did not appear as significant, no, for now in our analysis. So yeah, but yeah, I agree with what you said that we should probably try analyzing two sets, no? So we can separate the obvious ones, no? Of course, we can separate them, and then the non-obvious ones we can perform a separate analysis. So that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I will agree that it's actually interesting if we could do that as well. I was thinking on the research work that I presented on city attributes and country attributes. Actually, the decision attribute there was actually obtained from the city data set. So they had this idea on how these factors would actually come to play to the waste management. And then we just added the data on the country from another report. And it was interesting. And I believe this is similar to the insight shared by Dr. Chu on how even data from a different report becomes significant to reveal that pattern. So yeah, it's actually interesting to see that we could find new hypotheses or new ideas on how other unforeseen attributes are actually affecting this output.
Okay, thank you very much to our panel. For the interest of time, can we hear the last thoughts from our panel regarding this topic? Maybe we can start with Dr. Hanairo.
Okay. So we have seen the potential of machine learning to address sustainability challenges, and from our presentations, you can see that in my case, for example, it's a very narrow scope, or I used it for chemical systems, and then for Dr. Lopez and Dr. Gue, they use it for country level data. So we can see the scale and flexibility of machine learning, and it's a very exciting field, and I'm really happy to be working on this topic. And I thank you all for your attention.
Okay, how
Si
about
Mang
Dr.
Kila
Gue?
tag ni Tibaw Show, si nga ka-excited, tay baka ng bilin na alaga rin tawag.
Okay. So yeah, it's actually I'm happy to have participated in this webinar as
Palang
well,
sila ko ID kanyo.
as we have already seen how machine learning is gaining trend right now in terms of the academe and in the research field, how it has its application as sustainable development. And it's interesting, and I find it interesting that a lot of people are interested on this, and we can see that people are sharing that they're starting to work on AI for sustainability. So I'm hopeful that we could see more research works on this and see more patterns, recognize more patterns in otherwise big data that we are receiving right now. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Gue. Dr. Lopez.
Yeah, so thank you again for having us, no, in this lecture. And then, as I mentioned in my last slide, no, so I definitely believe, no, that this is a very interesting area of study right now, no, the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to analyze the volume of data which we have now. A lot of them are for free. So and this, as I also mentioned, because of the nature of machine learning, its unsupervised nature, it can give a fresh take on even the most studied topics already. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to publish on this and to review. Even previous studies we have done before, maybe we can get new conclusions from them if we take a look at them using a new tool or a new perspective. So again, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this morning's lecture.
Thank you very much to our panel. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And I would like to invite you to next month's sustainability lecture on May 25. Allow me to share my screen. Our speakers will be Dr. Heriberto Cabezas from the University of Miskolc, Hungary, and Dr. Angeline Lau from the Mathematics Department of DLSU Manila. And the topic would be maintaining productivity of co-culture systems in the face of environmental change. So please register in advance. And please do not forget to give an evaluation for today's lecture. I sent the link via chat box. And oh, by the way, for next month's lecture, it will be in both English and Spanish languages. Once again, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and thank you to our panel. Please enjoy the rest of the day, enjoy the rest of the week, and we will see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.